In this tutorial, I will demonstrate how to create a SwashSim freeway network consistent with example 1 of the Highway Capacity Manual. This tutorial is divided into 3 separate video presentations. In part 1, I will discuss the calculation of certain input values we need for entry into SwashSim. In part 2, I will set up the SwashSim network and enter the data discussed in part 1. And finally, in part 3, I will discuss the simulation output data. First, let's review the HCM example problem in Chapter 25, Section 11. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit here, and we can take a look at the facility configuration, and that's identified here. And you can see that it's comprised of 11 segments overall, and it includes several on-ramps and off-ramps. In this section here, we actually have a weaving segment because the on-ramp is directly connected to the off-ramp with an auxiliary lane. And then in this section here, we have a ramp overlap segment because the distance between the two ramps is less than 3,000 feet. That's a combination of the 1,500-foot influence area downstream of the on-ramp and 1,500-foot influence area upstream of the off-ramp. And the lengths for each of the different segment types is indicated here in this exhibit, as well as the number of lanes. Now let's take a look at the traffic data. So smaller trucks, single unit trucks and buses comprise 1.25% of all the traffic, and tractor trailers comprise 1%. In this example, we're going to work just with time period 1, and that's in this first row here of Exhibit 25-45. So the main line entering flow rate is 4,505 vehicles per hour. And then we've got 450 vehicles entering at on-ramp 1, 540 at on-ramp 2. We've got 450 entering at on-ramp 3, 270 exiting at off-ramp 1, 360 exiting at off-ramp 2, and 270 exiting at off-ramp 3. And again, the combination of on-ramp 2 and off-ramp 2 is the weaving segment. This value in parentheses here, 50 vehicles, indicates the number of vehicles going directly from the on-ramp to the off-ramp, and we're going to ignore that small amount in our example. But if we come back here to our geometric configuration, we can see again that the weaving segment is comprised of on-ramp 2 and off-ramp 2. In SwashSim, for the mainline entry and on-ramp entry points, we will work directly with vehicle volumes. For the off-ramps, however, we're going to work with exit percentages rather than exit volumes. So let's take a look at that calculation for this example problem. So what I'm showing here in this spreadsheet are each of the 11 segments that we have comprising our freeway facility. And then I have here in the first segment what our mainline entry volume is, and then the volume entering at the on-ramp, volume exiting at the next off-ramp, volume entering at the on-ramp that's part of the weave, and the volume exiting at the off-ramp that's part of the weave, and then the volume entering at the next on-ramp and the volume exiting at the next off-ramp. And then in this next column, I'm showing what the volume is in each segment as we progress from the entry point to the exit point of the facility. So in the first segment, again, we start off with our mainline entry volume. And let me go back here again to the geometric configuration. So we have that 4,505 entering here, and then our next segment is going to be the on-ramp. And so now we're going to add that 450 coming from the on-ramp to our mainline volume. And the next segment has neither an on-ramp or an off-ramp, so that mainline volume will remain the same. Then the next segment is going to be an off-ramp, but we subtract that off-ramp volume at the next segment downstream because the traffic exits at the endpoint of that given segment. So we'll still have the same mainline volume for that off-ramp segment, and then the exiting volume will take effect at the next segment downstream. So at this point we've subtracted that off-ramp volume. And so on until we finally end up with a volume of 5045 that exits the last segment of the facility. So again, in SwashSim we're going to need to enter the exit percentage rather than the exit volume. And so that calculation is shown here. So I'm taking the mainline volume at that particular location and dividing that into the exiting volume using the absolute value there, and doing that for each of our 3 off-ramps. At this point we'll move on to setting up our network in SwashSim and entering the data that I've just discussed, which will be contained in part 2 of this video tutorial.